Welcome to today's webinar, a conversation with Dr. Katie East. I'm Amanda McGill Johnson, the Executive Director of Nebraska Cures. Nebraska Women in STEM is a partnership of my organization, Nebraska Cures, and BioNebraska. We started Nebraska Women in STEM to reduce barriers for women in STEM industries and to create an environment where they can thrive. Part of that mission is bringing you really awesome conversations like this one today that focus on the just many wonderful women and careers in STEM. Make sure you regularly check our website, nebraskawomeninstem.com, as well as our social media to learn more about other upcoming events. We have some advocacy-focused ones around the Nebraska legislature, and then, of course, our conference is coming up March 26th and 27th. With that, it's time to meet Dr. Katie East. She's a forensics anthropologist, bioarchaeologist, and science communicator. Dr. East by day investigates skeletons as a board-certified forensics anthropologist, and by nights and weekends, she captivates public audiences with the wonders of science and history. And she'll be one of our speakers at our conference coming up soon. A quick FYI as we get started, if you have questions for Katie, you can pop them in the chat and we'll get to them when it's appropriate, or you can wait till the end and I will have questions as well. So either of those methods works fine. And with that, I'll turn things over to you, Dr. East.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Let me get my presentation up. Can everyone see the slides?
I'm seeing them.
Perfect. Excellent. So thank you for that wonderful introduction. There's not too much more I want to add, but today the goal is to tell you a little bit about what it is that I do, forensic anthropology and science communication, how I got to where I am, and how that sort of journey shaped kind of the nature of these two things that I do together. So we will be talking about forensic anthropology and science communication. If you are interested in some of the stuff I talk about and you want to learn more about what I do, these are some ways we can connect. I'll share these at the end as well, and I'll throw them in the chat. But hopefully you'll see by the end that I do a few different things. I'm still sort of experimenting with my science communication. So if anything speaks to you, seems interesting, please connect. So I am Dr. Katie East. I am a forensic anthropologist right now. I have been one for about 7 years. I work for a private company that supports the work of a government agency, and that agency works to identify American service members missing from past military conflicts. So my day job is to carry out skeletal analysis, primarily of World War II era remains, to help to identify these service members and figure out what happened to them around the time of their death, to bring closure to families, and to bring answers about what happened to these folks. When I'm not doing that, I am an adjunct instructor. I teach forensic anthropology online and in person, and I also teach some community continuing education classes at Metro Community College. And when I'm not doing any of that, I like to do science communication. So I will give public lectures. We'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. I work on a blog post, and I work on sort of creating some online course material as well. So again, still sort of in the experimental stage of my science communication journey, but we'll sort of talk about what that looks like. Before we get too far into what I do or how I got to where I am, I think we should probably define what forensic anthropology is. Lots of folks, I think, have an idea of what forensic anthropology is from TV shows, movies, true crime podcasts, that kind of thing. But a lot of that can be a little bit inaccurate. So as a science communicator, I do think it's important to make sure that we're all on the same page and to maybe educate you a little bit about what it is that forensic anthropology actually is. So the really sort of cut and dry definition of forensic anthropology, there's many, but essentially it is the application of biological anthropology, the science methods and techniques, to questions of medical legal significance. In this case, with the recovery of human remains, the identity of unidentified human remains, interpreting trauma, and estimating time since death. And there's a lot of other things that a forensic anthropologist can do as well. What's unique about the field of forensic anthropology versus other fields of forensic science is that it was really born out of a social science field, which is quite unique when you think about forensic fields in general. And what's nice about that is that it allows us as anthropologists to really examine the human skeleton and the human body from both a biological and a cultural perspective. And I'll talk a little bit in a bit about why that really drew me to the field. But what that means essentially is when we are examining a skeleton, we recognize that our bodies are obviously a product of our DNA, right? That's the biology side of things. But we're also a product of where we've lived, who we've interacted with, what we eat, what we do, sometimes even what we believe. And because of that, we as forensic anthropologists can interpret from the skeleton not just, somebody's age or their height or their sex, but also something about their actions and their behaviors or what they ate and things like that. So that's why forensic anthropology is really this unique marriage between the hard sciences and biology, as well as these social sciences and cultural anthropology and things like that. And that's why I love it so much. But to rewind a little bit and explain a little bit about how I found this field and why I enjoy it so much. This is a actual Katie East original from 1996, which I'm aging myself, but I was 6 years old at the time. My mother recently found this when going through some old documents. And I always tell people that I've always wanted to be a scientist. And I think that this is really quite obviously an example of that. If you can't read 6-year-old English, this says, I want to look for old bones, which I think is very appropriate for how my career sort of developed and evolved. Obviously, 6-year-old Katie thought I would be working on dinosaurs, if you can't tell what that is. But I think that she'd still be pretty excited about where I ended up. Now, although I always kind of saw myself as a scientist, I didn't really know what that meant when I was younger. And I think perhaps this is an experience that a lot of young women and girls can relate to. But I had this passion for knowledge and for exploration and discovery, but I didn't know how to put that into words. All I knew is I had a really hard time answering questions of what do you want to be when you grew up? I didn't really want to be a firefighter or a nurse or a teacher. None of those things really spoke to me, but I didn't know how to explain what it is I wanted to do. And throughout sort of high school and early college, I really faced a period of a lack of confidence where I didn't see myself in science. I didn't think that was a field for me. I didn't have real role models that I could see doing science. And it just didn't occur to me that there might be a career for me in this field. And I was really fortunate that when I got to university, I went to Brown University for my undergrad, that I had the fantastic opportunity to just take any course I wanted. Those first 2 years at Brown, I got to explore everything from math to Shakespeare to introductory Russian. I took a Middle Egyptian hieroglyphs class. I took as many different courses as you can think of. I do think my parents were a little bit concerned about, what I was doing with my time. But eventually, two really wonderful things happened. One, I discovered the field of forensic anthropology, or in that case, biological anthropology, which is the foundation of forensic anthropology. And I realized that I was really good at the hard sciences, at like understanding how pieces fit together and memorizing complex Latin terms and things like that. But I was fascinated by people. And I was having a hard time marrying that until I took this class about the human skeleton. And like I said before, I realized that the body, the human body, is really a connection between those biology aspects and those social science aspects. So once I found this field, I was all in and really decided to pursue it as excuse me, as far as I could. I went on to a master's degree and a PhD, which we'll talk about. But the second thing that happened while I was at Brown is I played rugby. And I think it was a really awesome experience for a lot of reasons. One of the reasons was I had never played rugby before, so it was an amazing challenge, physically, mentally. But the other side of it is that I was surrounded by these really hardworking, ambitious, tough women who worked hard every day and just were incredibly successful in what they did. And it was just taken as matter of fact. It was taken as matter of fact that people worked hard during the day on the field. They went to their classes, they participated in community events, they had full schedules, and they were being successful in all of it. So I had these really wonderful female role models in a variety of fields to sort of point me in the way and help me build my confidence in a way that I really hadn't had prior to that. During my undergraduate and then master's experience, I was focused primarily on the biological anthropology side of forensic anthropology. So I was focused on how we can study skeletons in archaeological contexts, in particular. And so I did a lot of field work. I volunteered a lot on projects, and I got to work on everything from, on the left here is an image from a cemetery removal in New Jersey, and then is that your left? Yeah. And then on the right, I was working on a survey in Florida. And, I had an opportunity to really try out the field of archaeology and excavation, and I loved it. And I really wanted to continue in that vein, and still work with human remains when I could. And so that led me to my PhD, which I did in Ontario at McMaster University. And for this, I really focused more on the lab-based science part of biological anthropology. And in fact, I looked at human hair, which is a very, if anyone's done a PhD, it gets very, very niche, very, very specific, very, very fast. So I looked at hair cortisol, so stress hormones in human hair. And the idea that I was exploring was, can we examine experiences of stress around death and dying in the far past and today? So I examined stress hormones in archaeological samples that were about 2,000 years old, all the way up to modern samples at that time. And it was, again, a fantastic challenge to really manage a project like this for the first time. And again, to really work on my confidence. I still felt that I was a little bit questioning myself and my role in science, especially when I went more into the biochemistry side of things, because that was a whole new world for me. And I can definitely see, looking back on my dissertation experiences, moments where I should have stood up for myself a little bit more. And I learned a lot from having not done that, and maybe some mistakes being made, but learning from them. And so the other side of doing a PhD, of course, I got to do some field work with that. The field work for this was very much not actually digging in this case, but I got to go to the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C., or their Satellite Research Center in Maryland, and do collection of hair samples from some of their collections. And you can see not a very exciting setup, but a really interesting project. And then during that time, I got to travel a lot. And that was a really exciting part for me of doing research and studying a field like biological anthropology, is that you have the opportunity to travel for research and conferences, especially if you're at a program that has really good support for its students. So I was able to attend and work on projects in Greece, in Egypt, in Ireland, and then I was able to travel in between those and work in Washington, D.C. and Tenerife, and some travel in Greece as well. And so I always say that although I might not be in biological anthropology anymore, and I've transferred my skills to forensics, I'm really grateful for all these opportunities. And that was a really wonderful part of my PhD. Even if I don't use the skills of my hair analysis anymore, these opportunities to travel and learn and meet people really helped shape me and sort of where I decided to take my PhD and what I do today. And so towards well, I guess about halfway through my PhD, I had a moment. I think maybe a lot of people have this moment when they've been working on the same project for many years, where I had a bit of crisis of identity, where I realized that all of my research was focusing really on these 2,000-year-old remains, and what was I doing to help people today? Was I doing anything that was really valuable for people today? The other side of the coin was that I realized that I had been so focused on my research that I hadn't really done what I needed to do to get a teaching job, which is what I always thought would be the outcome of my PhD. And due to a series of maybe poor planning on my part, I just didn't have the resume that I was going to need to be able to pursue a job like that. So I started looking into the field of forensic anthropology, started applying for jobs, ultimately got the job that I have today. I'm very grateful for all of that. But I ultimately did drop out of my PhD program for about 2 years. And during that time, I finished writing my thesis and did defend, and obviously I'm now a doctor. But that was one of the best choices I think I could have made for myself. It was obviously really hard to work full time and finish a PhD, but it was really the best decision I could have made for where I was and where I saw my career going. But during my PhD, not only did I get to travel, which was an amazing experience that I think shaped where I ended up and who I am, but I also got to explore the field of science communication. So science communication means different things for different people, but for me, it really means sharing the research within the field that I'm an expert in with a broad and diverse public to help them be better informed, entertained if possible, and educated, especially when it comes to understanding information that's given to them later or exploring possible career paths. And I was really introduced to this field during the last year. I was on campus for my PhD, and during this competition called the 3-minute thesis. This competition started in Canada. It's reached some schools in the US, I think, at this point. And essentially, it's a competition that allows graduate students to get up on stage in front of hundreds of people and talk about their research for 3 minutes. You get 3 minutes and one static slide, and it's you alone on a stage. And I had never done anything like this. My last acting or performing experience was when I was 5 years old and I was in the nativity play in my church, which my grandmother liked to bring up a lot while I was preparing for this experience. She's like, "Oh, don't worry, you've got it. You remember when you were the angel Gabriel when you were 5? Oh, you'll do great." I was like, "Oh, thanks, Grandma." Always support from grandma. But this was a really unique challenge. I had never done anything like this. And while I was preparing for it, I met with some people, did some training, had some mentorship, and I realized I really enjoyed it. And then I got up on stage and I did really well. I got first place for social science, and then I won well, I call it Miss Congeniality. It was actually called Competitor's Choice, but I like to call it Miss Congeniality. And I realized that I was kind of good at this, and it was so much fun. It was so different from anything I had done before. So that really, I think, sparked my interest in exploring more ways to get out and talk to people about science, to challenge myself to look at my science through somebody else's eyes and find creative ways to tell those stories. So today, I sort of mentioned that I've gone from biological anthropology to forensic anthropology. And that might be a little bit confusing, but essentially the skills at the foundation of both of these fields are the same. The practice of skeletal analysis is the same. What's different is the application. In biological anthropology, we look at large samples, we look at lots of skeletons, we're asking questions about past populations and behaviors and things like that. In forensic anthropology, we're often interested in just one person and what happened to them and who they were. So we're asking very different questions, even though we have the same basic methods. So it was definitely a learning curve going from biological anthropology to forensics. I was really fortunate to be surrounded by a group of women who, most of my colleagues are women who, had gone through simpler things. They all had PhDs. They were all really supportive. They helped me learn all these new methods. And so over the last 7 years, I've transitioned into forensic anthropology. I've done a lot of on-the-job learning. And ultimately, last year, I became a board certified forensic anthropologist. And essentially what this means is that there are about 200 board certified forensic anthropologists in North America since 1975. And it's a way to recognize that we have the skills in the field to be able to carry out analysis at a very high level. And so going from biological anthropology and then straight into forensic anthropology without an actual degree in forensic anthropology and becoming board certified was a pretty amazing challenge and amazing success story for me. But in my day job as a forensic anthropologist, I mentioned that I work in the field of past accounting. So I work on skeletons. One of the big projects that we have worked on was helping to identify the U.S. Service members, sailors, and Marines who were aboard the USS Oklahoma during the attack on Pearl Harbor. That was one of the first projects I got to work on. And it's been a really amazing experience to give back to families in this way. The challenges I had during my PhD, where I was worried that I wasn't giving back to people today, that I wasn't, affecting living people, I feel I get to do that now. I get to really bring answers to people who haven't had them for maybe generations. And that's a really amazing thing to be a part of. The downside is I don't really get to talk to people as much. So that fledgling science communicator within me that was awakened at the end of my PhD sort of went dormant for a little while when I first started this job. And then I realized, which I think a lot of people maybe who have higher degrees or lots of expertise sometimes forget, is that you can just do other things. You don't need like someone to give you permission to call yourself a science communicator or to call yourself, something different than your day job. And so I took a leap to just start giving talks to the public. And it was really scary at first because I was like, am I good enough to do this? Do I have permission to do this? Do I need to take another class? Do I need to get another certificate? Do I need a new master's degree? Thank God. No. And my first talk was actually at the Bellevue Public Library. They were so amazing and supportive. I gave my talk up here on the top right, Skeletons in the Closet and on the Screen, where I talked about what TV shows like Bones get right and wrong about forensic anthropology. And I got some really great feedback, and I had a really good time talking to members of my community and educating, and again, talking about forensic anthropology in a very different light than I get to do in my day job. So my repertoire of talks has really expanded since then. I mentioned before that I'm sort of still experimenting with my science communication. I think it's really important when you're carrying out science communication to have your audience in mind. And I'm still figuring out who my audience is. So I have a few talks for different types of audiences. Um, Ancient Egypt's Coldest Cases is more for the history lover, for older adults, especially. Skeletons in the Closet on the Screen is mostly for teens. And then Bones, Bodies, and Bestsellers is for authors. I've given that to a lot of author groups. And then, of course, A Forensic Anthropologist Ruins Halloween is pretty much for anyone, but that's pretty specific to the Halloween season. I've also been exploring applications of my science to teaching online courses. So I offer this class through Udemy, which was again a really unique challenge because I had to record myself. And I put together like almost like little mini podcast episodes about a bunch of true crime cases and how they reflect changes and developments in forensic anthropology. So that was a really cool challenge. And I'm always working on a new talk because I'm always, thinking about new ways to get people interested in forensic anthropology. And it's really exciting to give myself the freedom to explore those, to work on those. It's my version of creativity. I don't paint or knit or crochet, but I really like putting together stories. And I really like the artistic and graphic side of putting together presentations. So I get to do that now sort of on the side. So stay tuned. This is the next talk I'm working on, Means, Motive, and Opportunity. And this again will be for some of those author groups that I talk to. So that's all I have for you guys. Again, if you'd like to connect, I'll throw the links in the chat at some point. But these are some of the places that I write because I've also sort of been exploring that side of science communication. On Medium, I've written a bunch of stuff that's kind of more experimental, kind of all over the map. In this Substack, I've written things more focused for authors. And then on my LinkedIn, I share things that are more for folks looking for careers in forensic anthropology and students. So stay tuned. We'll see where I end up. But I've been really enjoying building my platform, trying out new things, interacting with people from all over the world, really, but especially throughout Omaha and the Midwest. And hopefully it continues. And we'll see what comes next. So Amanda, that's all I
Yeah.
have. Do we have any questions?
Yeah, you can stop sharing here in a moment, but like
Perfect.
I am absolutely fascinated by you and this path and the work that you've done and
That's
just like
great.
both like the depth and the like I know you're in a lab and you're doing the work, but the meaningful work that you do for military families. Like I was
Yeah,
getting goosebumps when you were talking about, some of those projects you've worked on. But then also just how inspirational the initiative and risk taking has been. Like I don't need a certificate to be a science communicator. I can just give it a shot, and put together presentations,
scary.
pitch them to the library or whatever. Like I'm beginning to brainstorm other ways we can work together in the future. But
Oh, I love that.
yeah, folks, if you have questions, it's okay to unmute yourself and ask at this point, or if you'd prefer to put something in the chat, you're welcome to do that. Does anyone have a question? I'll pause for a moment.
Hi, this is Michaela Lucas. I would love to ask a question.
Go for it,
Yes.
Michaela.
Can you talk a little bit more about the USS Oklahoma work that you did? That's absolutely fascinating. I think you mentioned that was early in your career and just kind of what you discovered about that part of the military piece that may have impacted your future work.
Sure. I can speak in broad terms again because I am a contractor for the agency that does this work. So if you would like more details, you can go to their website and get all the specifics that I maybe have not been approved to talk about because again, I am a contractor. But in general terms, and the website, if you're interested, is dpaa.mil. NPAA.mil. And they'll have lots of information there about their projects, especially the USS Oklahoma. And so when I started here or there, working at the private company that supports that agency, I didn't really know what to expect. I thought we would be working more on traditional forensic cases. We have, maybe one body, one short list of candidates, and then we would narrow down the list, kind of traditionally like you would in a more modern criminal case. What I found, though, is that there are many instances, especially from World War II, where we aren't dealing with single loss events or single casualty events. We're dealing with large loss events like shipwrecks or ships sinking or aircraft crashes, where there are two, three, four, and in the case of the USS Oklahoma, up to 400 individuals that were lost in a single event. And so when it comes to working or supporting a project like that, I realized it's not just about identifying individuals, it's a huge project management, it's a huge data management task. And so being able to support that project, I got to see a lot of that, just the management side of things. Like, how do you keep track of 13,000 bones that came out of the ground? How do you then use a combination of DNA and anthropological methods to sort them into 400 individuals and then work to identify them? And that sorting part is what actually really excited me because it's a huge logistical and logical puzzle. You don't really, there aren't specific methods that you can use to say, oh, okay, I know how to arrange, go into with 13,000 bones and I know exactly which ones to pick out. You have to really use all of your deep knowledge in the field and all of your logic to be able to use process of elimination, checking, left against right sides, checking articulations, looking at biological parameters, all sorts of different things. And so from there, I was like really hooked because I thought that was such a good challenge. And the payoff was so great because you get to help so many families in those instances. So I think that's the part that's really made me stick with this field and also encouraged me to try to bring science communication into my day job is because of that interaction with the families and being able to give them answers. At the end of the USS Oklahoma, we had some really amazing opportunities to attend a few funerals of the service members who were from the Midwest. A surprising number of these guys who were on this ship in Hawaii were from the Midwest, which I thought was really, really interesting. And I got to talk to families and I got to see what they want to know about the science. They're not necessarily interested in, how exactly does DNA extraction work? Which measurements did you take of a cranium? Like, nobody wanted to know that. They wanted to know, how do we take care of the remains? How much do we care about the work that we're doing? Why are we doing it? And what, is our intended outcome? Or how are we going about really solving these big questions? And so that not only really encouraged me to stick with the job, but also to try to bring in some science communication practices into the work for sure. I hope that answered your question. I got a little long-winded. I tend to do that.
I love it. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, we've got some questions in the chat now. I'll just take them in order. What advice would you give to someone like yourself just starting their master's?
Oh, I love this question. So the biggest piece of advice that I always give people who are looking to start, a master's degree or something in forensic anthropology is I encourage students to do sort of this little like mini exercise where you sit down and you sort of make like a mind map. I don't know if you remember these from when you were younger, where you have a circle in the middle, you write forensic anthropology, if that's the field that you want to go into. And then you make a lot of little tendrils coming off of it. And I want in those, think about what it is about forensic anthropology that you like so much. Can you break it down? Can you say, oh, I really like that, you have to really become an expert. I want to be an expert. Or is it that you really think skeletons are fascinating? That's the field or is it that you want to help families? Really break that into 3 or 4 little pieces that are what you really love about the field. And then can you break those down even more? When it says, oh, I really think skeletons are cool. What is it about skeletons? Do you just like have this morbid fascination? Or is it the biology and understanding how these skeletons are a product of our biology and our culture? And then once you have all those little circles, I would really encourage you to say, what other fields might overlap with those skills and interests and values? Because forensic anthropology is a very specialized field. There are a lot of programs that are currently offering master's degrees and certificates, there's not a whole lot of jobs. So it is a very difficult field to break into. And so if there's a way that you can maybe get a master's degree in something a little bit broader, maybe something adjacent to forensic anthropology, and then you can always take coursework or specialize or do fieldwork opportunities that give you the skills you need, but still allow you to be more marketable when other things come up. That's the direction I would wish somebody had suggested that I take. So hopefully that's helpful to you. But try not to over specialize too soon. Keep your options open, see what's out there. And, even go on LinkedIn and search some jobs with titles that you thought were interesting. Search forensic anthropology, see how many jobs actually come up, or see what adjacent jobs come up and what skills they're looking for, and see if you can sort of shape your educational journey that way.
Cool. We had a question that's just, are there volunteer opportunities in these sorts of fields?
Yeah, so that's a tough one. There are. There's lots of volunteer opportunities if you're looking for more traditionally biological anthropology or archaeology in particular. And those, if you're interested in a field like forensic anthropology, I would definitely encourage you to get just even adjacent volunteer experience like archaeology. You can go to the American Institute of Archaeology has a dashboard of field schools. And these are places where you can go get credits if you're still in school, and you can get hands-on learning in the field for archaeology. In terms of more traditional volunteer, for archaeology at least, you can always just sort of search what archaeological projects are happening in the area. Lots of places will accept volunteers. But in terms of forensic anthropology more specifically, it's difficult because there are not a lot of forensic anthropology labs out there. So if you're willing to travel, there's a lot you can just search internships, forensic anthropology, dpaa.mil also has some if you're interested, but most of them are going to be unpaid. Most of them are going to be a semester long, so it's kind of a commitment if you don't live local, and they're very, very competitive. So pluses and minuses for that kind of thing. But I would really encourage, again, if you're interested in this field, get adjacent volunteer experience. See if there is internship or volunteer opportunities in a medical examiner's office, in a morgue with death investigators or crime scene techs. And that gives you an opportunity to explore a little bit more broadly and still bring relevant experience on your resume if you do decide to pursue that field specifically.
Interesting. Someone put, I like Zooniverse for citizen research.
Oh,
I don't know that, but maybe.
Yeah, that's my favorite because they do not only anthropology, but they do all sorts of STEM research. It's a citizen science. You go in, you might be identifying animals on pictures, or for me, for astronomy, it's they go through and tell you how to classify galaxies and collisions of galaxies. So, and then of course, if you participate, you can be on professional papers.
oh, cool.
And it's free. You just log in, you make an account, and there's, you might be deciphering somebody's handwriting, which kind of goes with anthropology.
Yeah.
Something.
Yeah, and I would definitely say if you decide to do something like that and you're hoping to use it as volunteer experience, definitely just keep really detailed notes about what you do. Because whenever you put something like that on your resume, you really want to be able to say exactly what skills you learned, exactly how many whatevers you did, and how you contributed to the overall project. So make sure you keep track of all that kind of stuff. Very cool. Thanks for sharing.
Another question. You clearly have very long, busy days. How do you stay motivated? Could you give any tips about how you manage so many different tasks simultaneously? And I will add, Katie is a new mom in the last few months, and so she's also juggling a baby at home.
Yeah, so I was just going to say, these things might change in the next, up until recently, I haven't had a little one to really worry about. So it definitely, we'll see. We'll see how that factors in. But in terms of how I've juggled things up till now, my job is, I'm really fortunate with the job that I work that I had a flex schedule. So I was able to work 9-hour days and get every other Friday off. So that gave me lots of time to work on my courses, or on my projects or things like that. The other thing is that I don't have hobbies. It's terrible to say. I guess that's not entirely true. I like to go hiking or go for walks or things like that. But for the most part, doing things like making presentations and preparing for talks is just something that I find enjoyable. So while other people might be sitting in front of the TV crocheting, I'm sitting, searching through open domain websites for cool images that I can use in my next presentation. It's very nerdy. I recognize that. But it's just it sort of fills my cup. I use it more as a relaxing thing, that kind of stuff. And then when it comes to teaching, it can be a slog. I will say during the semester, it definitely can get difficult to juggle all that stuff. And one of the ways I do that is I try to automate as much of it as I can, especially my online course. I've taught it for so many years at this point that a lot of it just sort of runs on its own, and I really only am needed for the grading, which is really nice. But it's really just finding strategies for each part to make sure that things are running smoothly, and hopefully I don't have to put too much mental energy into any one particular thing at any particular time. But again, this could all change now that I'm not getting nearly as much sleep.
Those first months are hard.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, things are changing.
Yes. Well, we'll have to touch base with you in a year or two. And I
Yeah.
don't know how that's going. Krista asked if the mind mapping and volunteer ideas could work also for high school and middle school
Oh, yeah.
students. And her daughter loves true crime and at forensics camp. Oh, yeah, UNO at Aim for the Stars is
Oh,
always fun.
cool.
So,
Yeah, I think that would be a great idea. If you're interested, again, I guess I can just share it now. I on my website have I created a PDF guide for students who want to do sort of this mind mapping. I sell it on my Buy Me a Coffee for like 15 or 20 bucks. If you can't pay that or don't want to pay that, and I mean, you can just contact me through my website and I'll give it to you for free. But it was sort of my attempt to put down all of these thoughts about like how to help students that I've worked with in the past. And I think that would work great for high school, middle school students. And if you use it and they find it useful, please let me know. Because I would like to know that for sure. Let me see if I can find a link and I'll share it.
I would
Um,
imagine some of the mind mapping would be helpful in other STEM careers as well, or
I
even
think so.
pursuits, and just like looking at what those adjacent things are too, and keeping an open mind.
Yes. And I think that, at least in my field, it often becomes difficult where people sort of get stuck on, like, I'm a forensic anthropologist. I want to be a forensic anthropologist. And like you said, they maybe don't have as much of an open mind as to all these other opportunities that might be out there that might be a little bit more accessible, um, but just as interesting and just as rewarding. So definitely things that I think lots of fields can keep in mind.
I feel like you've covered a lot of the pre-planned questions I had just in like sharing your story and all that. But it sounds like you felt very supported as a woman. Like you said when you started your career after being in school, you were surrounded by women, which was helpful.
Mhm.
But talk to me a little bit more about being a woman in
Sure.
science, and if you did face any barriers, maybe you didn't share, or just how important that environment was of support.
Definitely. So, I will say that now I feel very supportive, maybe during my PhD, less so. One thing that's really nice about the field of biological anthropology and forensic anthropology is that it's predominantly women right now. The older generation was mostly male, but there's been lots of talk about why, but it's quite a supportive field for women right now, which is really exciting. And so I had lots of really great mentors or lots of really good role models that I could look to who were balancing things like motherhood or were facing challenges, maybe in the field or like not being taken seriously and had to work through that. And I got to hear their stories. So that the field itself is a little bit more supportive overall and a little bit more welcoming, and just in general for women. But I will say I still definitely face challenges, I think, at least. And most of that had to do with sort of confidence in male-dominated spaces. So coming from this like very supportive, safe environment, and then going out like for my PhD, I was working in an endocrinology lab. And then suddenly I was the only woman And I was coming from social sciences, so they all kind of were like, "What are you doing here?" Um, Fitting into that environment, I had a lot of trouble at first. And one of the ways that that really manifested is that I didn't stand up for myself. I didn't ask questions that maybe I should have. And I didn't take the ownership of my project that maybe I should have. And so that was a really sort of stark learning environment because I actually ended up making a pretty big mistake in my dissertation because I just didn't, listen to my own gut and whatever happens, it happens. It's fine. We overcame it. We have a PhD. But I often look back on that. I was like, if I had stood my ground, maybe we could have approached things differently. And I do think a lot of that had to be with, my confidence in these spaces, and a lot of that had to do with being a woman in those spaces. And then coming from an archaeology background, most of my field work, at least early on, before I went into sort of biological anthropology, were in male-dominated spaces. And they were heavily physical spaces because we're working in digging and out in the field and things like that. And I will say, for the most part, those were really supportive. The men that I worked with were all really great and really great mentors and teachers and things like that. And I had a really good time. But I also know lots of women who didn't. And the biggest challenge for me in those environments was that I was smaller and I had a harder time, carrying all the gear and digging all the holes. And so that was sort of a different challenge in terms of trying to prove myself out in the field. But overall, like I've been really lucky in the last 7 years that I work in a laboratory that we have about 20 forensic anthropologists that work for us. 19 of them, 18 of them are women at all different, stages of their career and their lives. Some have master's degrees, some have PhDs, but it's such a unique environment that I work in right now. And, going through pregnancy and being a new mom, I just felt like I had so many people I could go to and ask questions. It's such supportive managers in terms of, oh, hey, like I need to take an extra hour PTO this afternoon because like I forgot that I have to take care of a child. Like, sorry, like I haven't quite figured this scheduling thing out yet. So it's been really, really wonderful so far in this space for sure.
Well, thank you for sharing some of those struggles and things you wish you could tell your younger self, I guess,
Oh,
that
yeah.
hopefully some folks can learn from. Do you have, if anybody else has any questions, let me know. But before we wrap up, I do want to ask you a little more about science communication and just like
Mhm.
if there are tips you have for folks, and maybe this is a sneak peek of what you might talk about at the conference, right? But like tips for people in STEM who are interested in converting, or how do I better talk to people? Like you have some really fun presentations, that you,
Yeah.
but how to, think about those audiences and
Hmm.
how to learn to speak to them and maybe less sciencey terms, I guess. I don't know, like in relatable ways. That's what I'm
Yeah.
trying to say.
I think it's really interesting that you asked that question. That's because at the conference, that's kind of what my presentation slash workshop is going to
Sneak
be
peek.
centered around. Yeah. So my two pieces of advice for, if you're looking to share your own research, especially, or, just your field in general, is to really focus on finding your niche, and focus on finding your narrative. So in terms of your niche, what is it that you're an expert in? What really is what you love? What do you want to share? Because guaranteed it's going to be a little bit different than anybody else out there. And so I love to share about forensic anthropology, especially like from a pop culture angle. That's my thing that I love to do. The second side of that niche, though, is like, who wants to hear it? Who is out there that you think is going to be interested? Forensic anthropology is kind of a unique field because there's lots of different sort of niches. There's like the people who love true crime. There's the people who love, investigations or mysteries or authors or all that kind of stuff. So if you can find like what you are passionate about and then what people want to hear about, you have like a really good angle already to sort of explore creating some science communication materials. And if you can find something that's like catchy and relevant too, like that, I think is a really nice way to get the ball rolling. Because sometimes it's hard to just like sit down at a Word document and be like, I'm going to write a blog post. And you're like, about what? But if you can find something in the news or a recent research article or something going on in pop culture that like sparks something, you're like, oh, actually, that kind of reminds me of what I, did during my dissertation or something that I've read about. That's a great way to sort of start being inspired, I guess, in some ways, and then draw in people who are interested in both what you have to say and that thing. And then the second part of it is, building a narrative. There's a lot of talk in science communication about like using storytelling structures and using narratives to talk about science. And I think that can be really intimidating for some scientists, but really all that we're talking about when we say, using a narrative is thinking about talking about your science in a way that has a beginning, middle, and end. That's what a story is. And that's really what science is too. If you think about an academic article, it's got an intro, it's got a method section, it's got a results section, it's got a beginning, middle, end. So it's just about reframing that a little bit to talk about, why did you end up doing this? Your intro is the background. Why are you doing this? Why does anybody care? Your middle is how did you do this in a way that's like interesting and exciting? And then your outcome is like, wow, this is what we did. This is how it affects people. This is how it changes the world in some ways. And so that's really, I think, the easiest way to start approaching talking to people about your science is picture it sort of as a story arc, and then try to make them see the big picture. Step outside yourself for a second and try to be like, if I wasn't really interested in this cell or I don't know, like chemical or whatever, how would somebody else make me interested? Why should someone else care about this? So that's sort of the advice I would give. If you would like more, you can come to the conference. We'll have I'll be doing some interactive activities and talking a little bit about science communication principles, and how my experience in forensic anthropology, I think, shaped how I do science communication and hopefully can help you guys do science communication as well.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. And I know some
And I
other.
put some links in the chat if anyone's interested. My website and LinkedIn, some of my blogs, and then the Buy Me a Coffee is at the end that has my career exploration guide, as well as a guide that I did for authors. And again, if anything is not accessible to you because of price, please just send me a message through my website and I'll make sure that you have access to that.
Thank you so much, Dr. East, for spending some time in your busy schedule and momhood and all the things with us, because you're a rock star and I cannot wait to see you at the
Oh,
conference.
thank you so much.
I am going to real quick in the chat just pop in a super brief survey, that we do at the end of every event. If you have ideas for other awesome women that we should interview in this way, please let us know through that survey. Otherwise, have a great day, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.